Hello friends, it's Chari. I am back today with two Valentine themed Build-A-Cake cards. So of course, as always, we want to start with our Build-A-Cake die set and our Build-A-Cake add-on die set. And I've already cut out my cakes. The first one I'm going to do in the video today is the heart cake. I cut the large tier and the small tier from some pink spiffy speckles pattern paper. And then for the icing details that go on the top of the bottom of each tier, I used pink watercolor wishes paper. And then my plate is cut from lilac cardstock. Now I wanted this to be a little bit shorter, so what I'm actually going to do is grab that die that cuts that large tier that goes at the bottom. I'm going to line it up on the sides and make sure that that top arc of the cake falls below that lower arc. So the one that cuts the kind of edge of the cake up there, we want to make sure that it is below. And you're going to see what I mean here in just a minute. I am going to pull it down just a little bit more to get it the height I want it. You could also use the die that cuts the layers to trim this down as well. So you can see there how that top of the cake is below the cut line that cuts the edge of the cake. And I'll run this through my die cut machine, and then I'm going to get a tier of cake that is a little bit shorter than what the die creates. And this is just going to give me a little more space on my card for all the hearts that I'm going to put on the top of this cake. So here are all my cake pieces, and I can start to assemble them together. So for the large cake, of course, I have that nice little fancy topper with the scalloped edge. And I'm just going to add that with some adhesive runner and line up that cut edge of the cake. I'm going to go ahead and put it on the plate so that I can kind of see where the edge of it is for my icing that goes along the bottom. Of course, I have that same detail for the top so that my two tiers of cake match. And I will go ahead and put this onto the bottom tier, and this will give me a place to see the edge to put my little piping details. And I'm going to use some liquid glue for this one, just because it is those little bumps of icing. And I like how that darker pink kind of frames up that speckly pink cake. Now for the small tier, you just want to cut off two of those little bumps of icing, and then it will be the right size to fit on that smaller tier of cake. So just a few little dots of glue, and then I can snug this right against the bottom of that smaller cake tier. For the background of this card, I'm using two aquacolor papers. I have Spiffy Speckles that I use the checkered heart backdrop portrait, and then I have some watercolor wishes of the same color but a little bit darker, and we're going to get a nice tone on tone with those hearts, and this is going to give us a decorative yet subtle background for that cake. I'm also using some merman ink and dusting all the edges and corners of this backdrop. I think that inking like this really makes those little die cut details stand out, like the little stripes in the checkerboard and the little stitching detail that creates it. I'm also going to add some shimmer to this background with some gold metallic watercolor splatters. I'm using the blue gold instead of the yellow gold, just for a little more of a subtle look. And then I will set this aside to dry before I put it onto my card base. So first I'm going to put that solid piece of paper, that is the watercolor wishes paper. And I'm just putting this right onto my card base. Then I will layer over my checkered backdrop, and I'm going to use liquid glue for this. I'm going around all four edges and then through those diagonals between the open cut hearts. Then I can layer this on top of that watercolor wishes paper, and it's going to peek through those little die cut hearts. For the decorations on my heart cake, I cut a whole bunch of hearts in 3 different shades of pink, and I used the textured canvas cardstock pack in pink to pick out my colors. I used the hearts dies, which there are 6 different sizes, and then I also used the hearts from the Hearts and Stars skinny tag die. I do need a sentiment for this card, and I am using the sentiment that says Happy Valentine's Day from the Critter Conversation Hearts stamp set. I just like the size and the font of this sentiment, and I'm going to stamp this onto a white sentiment banner. and it will go right at the bottom below my cake. I do want to shorten this up because my sentiment is not quite as long as this banner. So I'm going to stamp it to one side, over here to the right, sorry about my head, and then I will realign the die and trim off the left side, giving myself a little fishtail banner on that side as well. And now I have a custom length banner that fits my sentiment perfectly. So most everything on this card is going to be popped up off of that background, starting with this sentiment banner at the bottom. It's really nice to use that checkered backdrop as a way to line up the sentiment because we have that nice grid. So I've put that with some foam squares, and then I'm also doing some foam tape all over the back of my cake. And I'm just going to place this slightly above my sentiment banner. So now I'm ready to decorate with my hearts, and I also have this little arrow from the Build-A-Critter Valentine's Accessories set. I cut this from some gold sparkle cardstock, and I want to put it like it is going through this large heart. But I actually needed it a little bit longer, so I cut it apart right in the center. I'm adding a little bit of liquid glue to each side, and then I'm just lining it up so it looks like it is shot through the heart. Now I can put some foam squares on the back, and this is going to go on the top of the cake as part of the cake topper. I'm also going to add another pretty large heart up here with this one. I like the way that looks with the two hearts, and of course I'm just adding the foam where it's going to touch the background and a little bit of liquid glue where it overlaps the other heart that's already popped up. Now to decorate the rest of my cake with all my little hearts, I just spent some time kind of figuring out where they looked good, varying the colors and the sizes, and just a sprinkling of hearts. I'm keeping them to the left side of this bottom tier, and then you're going to see I will put them on the right side of this upper tier. And once I have the placement looking the way I want, I just go through with my pick up pokey tool, pick up each of those little hearts, add a little drop of glue, and then drop them back into place. Once I had all of those hearts glued down, I actually went back to my little tray full of hearts, pulled out some of the little tiny ones, and started embellishing some of the larger hearts a little bit more. So I added those little hearts to the ones at the top. I'm going to add a couple more sprinkled around here. I'm going to layer one on this heart right here. I think that gives it some nice depth to layer those hearts together. And then of course I sprinkled some around outside the cake too, right onto that background. And of course, we need some glitter on this beautiful cake. I added glitter to the icing details at the bottom of each layer and the top of each layer, and just a couple of the hearts, mostly those small ones that were outside of the cake, and then the little ones that I embellished some of the larger hearts with. And then here is my finished heart cake card, and I just love how this turned out. It's so simple, but yet so pretty. So next up, I wanted to create a dirt cake. Hopefully you know what a dirt cake is. It's like chocolate cake and chocolate pudding and gummy worms and all that stuff. But I thought a dirt cake would be perfect for the cute little moles from A Mole Lot of Love. So I'm going to stamp out all the moles that I'm going to use on this cake using some jet black ink, so that I can do some coloring with some alcohol markers. Now I did kind of use my Olos and my Copics today. I like these red grays for the moles. I think they're very fun. For these, what I actually did was I colored all over with my lightest color first. Then I came in with my shading color, which is that RG5. So I colored all over with the RG3. I'm coming back in with the RG5, which mine are both on the same marker. Then I'm blending back out with the RG3, and that is the same method I did for all of these cute little moles. So again, going all over with the light color, coming in with my shading color and then blending back out with the lighter color. Then I'm going to go in with an even darker shade and color their paws. And I'm going back in with a darker shade still and just adding a little bit of shadow to their paws. Next up, I'm coming in with a light brown color to color their muzzles, and again, I'm just coloring them all the same. Next up, I need to color all these little piles of dirt. I'm starting with E25 for the bottom and along those little lines, and then I'm coming through with that E23, which is lighter, and just blending them out. And I'm making them all exactly the same because they're all going to be kind of layered together on this cake. You want it to look like it's all the same pile of dirt. For my little worms here, I'm going to use 2 shades of green. So I have a YG07 for my darker shade and a YG01 for the lighter shade. I also colored the little leaves on these little plants in green as well. And then I'm coming in with some little pops of color. I've got a pink color and a yellow color for those little blooms. I have colored these green like they're new plants, and then I thought this time I'd change it up and make them look like they're small flower blooms. And then of course we can't forget the shovel. I almost forgot it. I almost cut these out without coloring the shovel. I colored the handle yellow just for some extra color, and then I'm using some cool grays for the shovel itself. Now I came in with a light pink to give them some rosy cheeks, but it was a little bit too light, so I'm actually coming back in with a darker pink to rosy up those little cheeks of my moles. Then I'll use the coordinating dies, line them up, hold them in place with a little bit of removable tape, and run this through my die cut machine. Now I also wanted one of the little heart speech bubbles, but instead of coloring it with markers, I thought it would be fun to cut it out of some pattern paper. So I have some pink spiffy speckles pattern paper. I'm stamping out my cute little heart speech bubble and the sentiment that says, "I really dig you," which I think is really cute. And I'll just use the coordinating die to cut that out as well. So now let's work on our dirt cake. So I have cut out my pieces here out of a variety of brown cardstocks. I have a paper bag for the body of the cake, and I have chocolate bar and ground coffee for the other details. I am using some vintage photo distressing to kind of darken up this cake. We need to make it look a little more like dirt. So I am just ink blending from the bottom up. Then I'm going to add some splatters. I'm starting out with my watercolor palette, and I'm just going to use a brown color. You could also just smush that ink pad on your craft mat and use the ink as well. But I like using my watercolor because I feel like it has more of a pigment property. Oxide distress ink would work too. And for the brown, I don't want too big of blobs of brown, so I am going to put it on a block and kind of flick it off with my brush to get those little fine dots. I did add a few of larger dots. And then I'm also adding white. I think that adding 2 colors of splatters like this always gives it some really great dimension. So I'll just set that aside and let that dirt dry. And while that's drying, I can work on my background. So I'm using the stitched cloud backdrop in portrait and a piece of watercolor wishes paper. And I will run that through my die cut machine. And now I have these cute stitched clouds. But I want a white border around this backdrop, so I'm also going to cut this with the largest of the outside in stitched rectangles. So now I have that stitching detail around all 4 sides, and this will be a little smaller so we get a nice white border. I do need some grass, so I'm going to cut a piece of green watercolor wishes with that same outside in stitch rectangle. And then before I cut the top of it with a grass border die, I want to stamp my sentiment down here in the grass. So I'm just lining up the sentiment that says, "I like you a mole lot." I know these are Valentine's cards, but "I like you a mole lot" you could give that to anyone. It could be a birthday card. So I'm stamping the sentiment down there at the bottom. Then I can kind of bring this over to my backdrop, kind of figure out where my cake should be, make sure I have enough room at the top for my moles, and that gives me an idea of where to cut my grassy border. So I'll just hold that in place with some low tack tape and run that through my die cut machine. I'm going to do a little bit of ink blending with some freshly cut grass ink along those blades of grass. I just think it makes them really pop a lot more. And along the bottom so that stitching pops too. Now to assemble our card, I'm going to start with this stitch cloud backdrop, add some adhesive all over the back, and pop this onto a white card base so we have that nice white frame around it. For the grass, instead of gluing this directly to that backdrop, I decided to pop this up with some foam tape. I want to make sure it's all the way across and nicely supported, so I can just line this up along the bottom, and this is popped up off that background. Then I need to actually assemble my cake here, so I have my ganache that goes on the top. This is cut from some ground coffee cardstock, and I have two stripes that go through the center, so two fillings through the center. I thought it was fun to have both of these browns, so I have chocolate bar as the lighter one, and then I'm going to add the second stripe, which is that ground coffee again. I thought this just gave it a really fun look with those two layers of filling in there. Then I added some foam tape to the back so that my cake would be popped up as well. And I actually decided not to use a cake plate for this one. It's a dirt cake sitting outside in the dirt. And I'm also going to add a lot of little images here along the bottom, so I don't think you would see that cake plate very much anyway. So I'm just taking all my images and placing them where I want them to be. So I kind of have my layout before I start sticking anything down. And I actually did not end up using that extra little pile of dirt there, but I just wasn't sure if I was going to need it or not. So for each of these, I'm just going to glue them to the cake. And then for this one that's overlapping, I'm actually going to use a thin foam square. So this foam square is not quite as thick as what I use behind the cake and the grass, but it's going to give a little bit of dimension to those images in the foreground. So I'll do the same for this little mole with his head down in the dirt. And then for the images on top of the cake, obviously I need to pop this guy up with some foam squares because he needs to be popped up just like the cake. And I will add a little bit of liquid glue at the bottom where he touches the cake. Then I can add my other little pieces around him. I'm just adjusting him just a little bit there so I have room for my little flowers, which I will glue directly down, and the other little guy popping up out of the dirt, which I just think he's so cute, just popping up out of the dirt to say hi. He's the one that's going to get that speech bubble up there, which I will also use some foam squares on. And that just really helps fill the top of this card and add a little bit more to the sentiment. And of course, we need to add his little worm friend to the top as well. I thought about putting it down on that filling, but I decided against it. And here's where I've just decided that we're just going to leave off this little pile of dirt. We don't really need it. Now I have all these hearts left over from my first card, so of course we're going to add some little hearts to this card as well. So I pulled out one of each size. These are the ones cut with the Hearts and Stars skinny tag die in that kind of medium colored pink. And I'm just sprinkling these around above the top of the cake. Now for our glitter, of course, we're going to glitter the hearts, and then I added glitter to all the little piles of dirt. To me, that feels like mica in the dirt if you've got glitter on the dirt piles. And I just think this turned out so, so cute for a dirt cake. So here's another look at the two cards I created today with a Valentine's theme, but I think that you could use them for any occasion. Birthdays or weddings, they would be great. I hope this has inspired you to create some more cakes. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.